The Mother's Day Miracle. When innocence changed everything. When 45-year-old Grace Mbeki, a cleaning lady from Queens earning $16 an hour, received the most expensive Mother's Day bouquet in Manhattan from two children she barely knew, she had no idea that this single act of kindness would expose the darkest prejudices of their millionaire father and transform 3 lives forever in ways no one could have imagined. How could 2 innocent children, 6-year-old Anaclara and 8-year-old Gustavo, see the humanity in someone their own father had spent months dehumanizing? And why did their simple gesture of giving flowers to their housekeeper create a family crisis that would either destroy everything or heal wounds that ran deeper than anyone suspected? This is the true story of Grace Mbeki, the African immigrant cleaning woman who endured months of racist humiliation from tech billionaire Thomas Richardson, until his own children's pure hearts revealed a truth so powerful it shattered his worldview and changed the course of 3 generations, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of love can move the biggest mountains. Within 24 hours of receiving those flowers on Mother's Day 2024, Grace's life transformed from invisible domestic worker to beloved family figure, while Thomas Richardson went from heartless bigot to a man desperately seeking redemption. All because 2 children refused to see color, where their father saw only differences. Grace Mbeki woke up at 4:30 a.m. on that Mother's Day morning in her cramped Queens apartment, just like she had every day for the past 8 months since landing the cleaning job at the Richardson mansion in the Upper East Side. The silence in her 1-bedroom apartment felt heavier than usual as she prepared her coffee. Staring at the empty space where her own children's pictures once stood before the divorce took everything away. At 45, Grace had lost her marketing career, her marriage, her house in Johannesburg, and most painfully, custody of her 2 teenage children, who remained in South Africa with their father. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, braiding her graying hair into the tight bun that Thomas Richardson demanded, changing into the plain gray uniform that made her invisible in his world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The subway ride from Queens to Manhattan gave her 47 minutes to prepare mentally for another day of Thomas Richardson's casual cruelty. Another day of being treated like furniture with a pulse. Thomas Richardson, 52-year-old founder and CEO of Richardson Tech Solutions, was everything Grace had learned to fear in her 8 months working for him. Standing 6'2", with silver hair perfectly styled and wearing suits that cost more than Grace made in 3 months, he moved through his 12,000-square-foot mansion like a king surveying his kingdom. His net worth of $847 million made him one of New York's most powerful tech entrepreneurs, but his wealth had hardened his heart into something cold and calculating. From day one, Thomas had made it clear that Grace was beneath his notice, except when he needed someone to blame. He never used her name, referring to her only as the help or that woman. When Grace accidentally moved his newspaper from the breakfast table, he exploded about people who can't follow simple instructions. When she cleaned his office too quietly, he complained about lazy workers who don't take pride in their work. Every interaction was designed to remind Grace that in his world, she was nothing. But Thomas Richardson had no idea that Grace Mbeki held an MBA in international marketing from the University of Cape Town, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had once managed marketing campaigns for multinational corporations across 3 continents. The divorce had stripped away her work visa status, forcing her to accept cash-only domestic work, while she fought through immigration lawyers to rebuild her legal status. Thomas saw only a poor African cleaning woman. He never bothered to see the brilliant mind that calculated his casual cruelty with growing clarity. The Richardson children, however, lived in a completely different universe than their father. 6-year-old Anaclara, with her bright brown eyes and cascading curls, possessed an empathy that seemed to radiate from her very soul. 8-year-old Gustavo, serious beyond his years with his father's strong jaw but his mother's gentle heart, watched the world with the kind of careful observation that missed nothing. Their mother, Elena Richardson, traveled constantly for her art gallery business, leaving the children in the care of various staff members who came and went like seasonal employees. Grace first noticed something special about the children during her 2nd week at the house. While Thomas barked orders about which rooms to clean first, little Anaclara quietly left her coloring book open to a page showing a family of different colored people holding hands. When Thomas complained loudly about Grace's incompetence in front of guests, Gustavo would find excuses to walk past and smile at her with the kind of genuine warmth that reminded Grace why she had fought so hard to stay in America. The children began leaving small gifts for Grace. Drawings tucked under her cleaning supplies, cookies saved from their lunch, flowers picked from the garden arranged in plastic cups near her cart. Thomas, when he noticed these gestures at all, dismissed them as childish nonsense, but Grace treasured each small kindness like precious gems. These children saw her humanity when their father had decided she had none. As April melted into May, Thomas Richardson's behavior toward Grace became increasingly hostile. The pressure of a major business deal falling apart, combined with Elena's extended absence in Europe, turned his casual racism into active cruelty. He began timing her work with a stopwatch, criticizing her English pronunciation in front of business associates, and making comments about certain people, not understanding American work standards. Grace endured each humiliation in silence, knowing that without proper immigration status, she had no recourse and desperately needed this job. But Anaclara and Gustavo were watching everything with growing distress. They had never seen their father treat anyone so meanly, and they couldn't understand why Grace, who was always kind to them, deserved such treatment. The children began whispering together about how sad Grace looked, how she never smiled anymore, and how their father seemed to enjoy making her feel small. The breaking point came on the Friday before Mother's Day weekend. Grace was cleaning Thomas's home office when he returned from a particularly stressful business meeting. His latest product launch had received harsh reviews. His investors were asking difficult questions, and his wife had extended her European trip indefinitely. Looking for someone to blame for his mounting frustrations, Thomas found Grace carefully dusting his awards display. "Can't you do anything right?" he exploded, seeing a water spot on one of his crystal awards. "This is exactly why I should have hired an American cleaning service instead of some refugee who doesn't understand quality." His voice carried through the house as he continued his verbal assault, using words designed to strip away every ounce of Grace's dignity. "People like you come here thinking you deserve the same opportunities as real Americans, but you can't even clean a simple award properly." Grace stood frozen as Thomas's words hit her like physical blows. 8 months of accumulated humiliation crashed over her as he questioned her intelligence, her work ethic, her right to exist in his world. She felt tears threatening to fall, but refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she apologized quietly and continued cleaning, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. But Anaclara and Gustavo had heard everything from their hiding spot at the top of the stairs. 6-year-old Anaclara burst into tears, unable to understand why her daddy was being so mean to Grace, who had never hurt anyone. Gustavo, older and more analytical, felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach as he recognized the same tone his father used when talking about people on the news that he didn't like. That night, the children made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow was Mother's Day, a day when people were supposed to be extra kind to the women who took care of them. Grace took care of them every day, helping with homework, preparing their snacks, listening to their stories about school. If their father couldn't see that Grace deserved kindness, then they would show him. Using money from their piggy banks and enlisting the help of Carlos, the groundskeeper who had watched the children's growing affection for Grace with approval, they planned their Mother's Day surprise. Carlos, a father of 4, who had also witnessed Thomas's treatment of Grace with increasing disgust, agreed to drive the children to the flower market early Sunday morning. Mother's Day dawned gray and drizzly, matching Grace's mood as she prepared for another day in the Richardson house. Thomas had made it clear that he expected the house to be perfect for a business brunch he was hosting, adding extra pressure to what was already a painful day for Grace. As she rode the subway to Manhattan, Grace thought about her own children in South Africa, wondering if they remembered her on this day, if they missed her as much as she missed them. She arrived at the house at 7 a.m. to find it unusually quiet. Thomas was in his study making business calls, preparing for his guests who would arrive at noon. Grace began her cleaning routine, starting with the children's playroom where she always felt most at peace. The innocence of their toys and drawings reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, even when her daily reality felt overwhelmingly harsh. At 9:30 a.m., as Grace was vacuuming the main living room, she heard small feet running down the marble staircase. Anaclara and Gustavo appeared in the doorway, both wearing their Sunday best clothes and carrying something behind their backs with barely contained excitement. Their faces glowed with a kind of pure joy that only children can possess when they're about to surprise someone they love. "Grace! Grace!" Anaclara called out, bouncing on her toes with anticipation. "We have something super special for you." Gustavo, trying to maintain the dignity of his 8 years but equally excited, stepped forward with a serious expression that reminded Grace painfully of her own son. "Today is Mother's Day," he announced solemnly, "and you take care of us like a mother, so we wanted to give you something beautiful." From behind their backs, the children produced the most stunning bouquet Grace had ever seen. 24 long-stemmed roses in shades of pink, white, and yellow, wrapped in elegant paper with a ribbon that shimmered like gold. Mixed among the roses were baby's breath, eucalyptus, and small white flowers that Grace didn't recognize but that filled the air with the sweetest fragrance. The arrangement was easily worth $200, more money than Grace spent on groceries in a month. But it wasn't the monetary value that made Grace's breath catch in her throat. It was the pure love shining from 2 pairs of young eyes. The careful way Gustavo held the bouquet like it contained his heart. The way Anaclara bounced with excitement, waiting for Grace's reaction. These children had seen her humanity when no one else could, had chosen to honor her on a day when she felt most forgotten. "Happy Mother's Day, Grace," they said in unison, and Grace felt her careful composure crumble completely. Tears she had been holding back for months streamed down her face as she knelt to accept the flowers, pulling both children into a hug that felt like coming home after a long journey. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." The children beamed with pride, chattering about how they had picked each flower specially, how they had used all their allowance money, how they wanted Grace to know that she was special and important and loved. In that moment, surrounded by innocence and unconditional acceptance, Grace felt her broken heart begin to heal just a little. But Thomas Richardson had heard the commotion from his study. The sound of his children's excited voices, mixed with an unfamiliar woman's emotional response, drew him from his business calls with growing irritation. He emerged from his study expecting to find some minor household drama that needed his immediate correction. But what he saw stopped him cold in his tracks. There, in the center of his pristine living room, were his children wrapped in the arms of the woman he had spent 8 months systematically humiliating. Grace was on her knees, tears streaming down her face, holding his children like they were precious treasures while they giggled and chatted with obvious love and familiarity. The expensive flower arrangement lay beside them, its beauty and cost immediately apparent to Thomas's calculating eye. "What is going on here?" Thomas demanded, his voice cutting through the tender moment like a knife. The children turned toward their father with excitement, completely missing the dangerous tone in his voice. "Daddy, we gave Grace flowers for Mother's Day," Anaclara announced proudly. "Isn't she pretty when she smiles?" Gustavo nodded enthusiastically. "We used all our piggy bank money because Grace takes care of us every day, and she never has anyone to give her flowers, and today is Mother's Day, so we wanted her to know she's special." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face as the implications hit him. His children, his own children, had not only spent their money on the help, but they were treating her like family, like someone deserving of love and respect. The sight of Grace's tears, the genuine affection between her and his children, the expensive flowers that proved this wasn't just a childish whim. All of it crashed against Thomas's worldview with devastating force. "Children, go to your rooms immediately," Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. "We'll discuss this later." "But Daddy," Anaclara started to protest. "Now," Thomas commanded, and something in his tone made both children scramble to obey. But not before Gustavo whispered to Grace, Don't let him take your flowers away. They're yours. Grace stood slowly, clutching the bouquet to her chest like armor, preparing herself for the storm she could see building in Thomas's eyes. She had been fired from jobs for less than this, and she knew that the sight of his children showing affection to someone he considered beneath his notice would trigger his worst impulses. "What did you do to my children?" Thomas asked, stepping closer with menacing intent. "What kind of manipulation?" "I did nothing," Grace replied quietly, her voice steady despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "Your children have kind hearts. That's not my doing." "Don't tell me about my own children," Thomas snapped. "You're the help. You clean floors and empty trash. You don't get flowers, you don't get hugs, and you certainly don't get to play mother to children who aren't yours." Each word was designed to cut, to remind Grace of her place in his hierarchy. But something had shifted in Grace during those moments with the children. Their pure love had reminded her of who she was before life had stripped away her confidence, before divorce and immigration struggles had made her feel invisible. "You're right," Grace said, standing straighter. "I clean floors and empty trash. I also speak 4 languages, hold an MBA, and managed marketing campaigns across 3 continents before I lost everything and came here looking for a fresh start. Your children see me as a person who cares about them. You see me as nothing. That says more about you than it does about me." Thomas stared at her, shocked by the quiet dignity in her voice, by the intelligence suddenly visible in her eyes. For 8 months he had seen only what he expected to see. A poor, uneducated immigrant grateful for any work. But standing before him now was someone completely different. Someone whose composure and articulate response challenged everything he had believed about her. "I don't care what degrees you claim to have," Thomas said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You're in my house, working for my family, and I won't have you manipulating my children's emotions." "Manipulating?" Grace repeated, her voice rising slightly. "I arrive at 7 a.m. and leave at 6 p.m. I clean your house, prepare meals, and when your children talk to me, I listen. When they're scared during thunderstorms because you're traveling and their mother is in Europe, I comfort them. When Gustavo struggles with his math homework, I help him understand fractions. When Anaclara has nightmares, I check on her because no one else is here to do it. If showing basic human kindness to lonely children is manipulation, then I'm guilty." Each word hit Thomas like a physical blow, because they contained a truth he had been desperately trying to ignore. His children were lonely. Elena's constant travel and his own obsession with business had left Anaclara and Gustavo starved for adult attention and affection. While he had been seeing Grace as an intrusion into his world, his children had been seeing her as the one adult who consistently showed them care and interest. "That's not," Thomas started to protest, but Grace wasn't finished. "Do you know that Gustavo has been having nightmares about you being angry all the time? That Anaclara asks me every day when mommy is coming home because she misses her? Do you know that they leave drawings for me because they're proud when adults pay attention to their creativity? Your children are beautiful, intelligent, loving human beings who deserve better than being treated like inconveniences in your schedule." The living room fell silent, except for the sound of Thomas's harsh breathing. Grace's words had stripped away every defense he had built around his parenting, exposing the painful truth that his children had formed a deeper bond with their housekeeper than they had with him. The flowers in Grace's arms seemed to mock him, proof that his 6- and 8-year-old children possessed more emotional intelligence than he had shown in months. "You don't know anything about being a father," Thomas said weakly, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "You're right," Grace agreed softly. "I'm not a father. I'm a mother whose own children are thousands of miles away, who misses them every single day, who works in your house and sees 2 lonely children who need love and attention more than they need expensive toys or perfect grades. I see myself in them, people who just want to be seen and valued for who they are." Thomas turned away, unable to meet Grace's eyes as the full weight of his failures crashed over him. His children, his own flesh and blood, had spent their allowance money to honor someone they barely knew because she had shown them more genuine care in 8 months than he had managed in years. The sight of their joy, their obvious love for Grace, their pride in making her happy. It all revealed a truth about his parenting that was almost too painful to acknowledge. But worse than recognizing his failures as a father was recognizing his failures as a human being. For 8 months, he had treated Grace like she was less than human, had taken pleasure in reminding her of her powerlessness, had used her as a target for his own frustrations and prejudices, and she had endured it all while still showing kindness to his children, still maintaining her dignity, still finding ways to bring joy to the people around her. The business brunch he had planned seemed suddenly meaningless. The guests who would arrive expecting perfect service and expensive food felt like strangers whose opinions no longer mattered. All that mattered was the image burned into his memory of his children's faces when they gave those flowers, the pure love in their eyes, the pride in their voices when they called Grace special. "I need you to leave," Thomas said finally, not turning around. "Take the day off. Take the whole week. I need time to think." Grace nodded, understanding that this was not quite a firing, but not quite forgiveness either. She gathered her things quickly, pausing at the bottom of the stairs where she could hear the children's voices questioning why they had been sent to their rooms on Mother's Day. "Mr. Richardson," Grace called softly as she reached the front door, "your children love you. They talk about you constantly, worry about you when you seem stressed, brag about your accomplishments to anyone who will listen. They gave me flowers because they have big hearts, but they want to share that love with you too. You just have to let them." Thomas heard the front door close and felt something break inside his chest. The silence of his enormous house pressed against him as he sank into his leather chair, staring at the spot where Grace had knelt with his children. The image of their happiness haunted him. When was the last time he had made them that happy? When was the last time he had hugged them without checking his phone? When was the last time he had really looked at them and seen the incredible people they were becoming? Upstairs, Anaclara's voice drifted down. "Gustavo, why did Daddy get mad about the flowers? We just wanted Grace to be happy." And Gustavo's reply, wise beyond his 8 years, "I think Daddy forgot how to be happy. Maybe we need to help him remember." Thomas Richardson, millionaire tech entrepreneur, sat alone in his perfect house and finally understood that his children were right. He had forgotten how to be happy, how to see goodness, how to recognize the humanity in others. But 2 small children with piggy bank allowances had just taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. That love and kindness cost nothing but are worth everything. Grace Mbeki rode the subway back to Queens with flowers in her arms and tears on her cheeks, not knowing that the encounter in the Richardson living room had changed 3 lives forever. She didn't know that Thomas Richardson was upstairs apologizing to his children and asking them to tell him everything they knew about the woman who had cared for them when no one else would. She didn't know that within 48 hours, Thomas would be on her doorstep with his children, not as an employer, but as a father seeking redemption. She didn't know that her quiet dignity in the face of months of humiliation had planted seeds that would grow into genuine respect, then friendship, then a bond that would transform not just their relationship, but their understanding of what family really means. All Grace knew as the subway carried her home was that for one perfect Mother's Day morning, 2 beautiful children had seen her worth when their father could not, had chosen love over indifference, had reminded her that her value as a human being wasn't determined by her job title or bank account, but by the kindness she brought into the world. The flowers in her arms still smelled like hope, and for the first time in months, Grace Mbeki smiled with genuine joy, not knowing that the biggest changes were still to come. Later that evening, as Thomas tucked his children into bed, Anaclara looked up at him with serious eyes and asked, "Daddy, are you going to fire Grace because we gave her flowers?" Thomas felt his throat close up as he recognized the fear in his daughter's voice, fear that their act of kindness would have consequences for someone they cared about. "No, sweetheart," he managed to say. "I'm going to apologize to Grace because Daddy has been forgetting his manners." "Good," Gustavo said firmly from his bed. "Grace is the nicest person in our whole house. She makes everything better just by being here." As Thomas turned off their lights and closed their door, he carried his son's words with him like a revelation. Grace makes everything better, just by being here. His children, in their innocence and wisdom, had seen something he had missed completely. They had recognized someone whose presence brought light to their world, and they had honored her the only way they knew how, with flowers and pure, unconditional love. The next morning, Thomas Richardson would make phone calls that would change everything. He would learn about Grace's background, her education, her struggles with immigration status. He would discover that the woman he had treated as inferior was actually more qualified than many of his employees. He would realize that his casual cruelty had been directed at someone who had more grace and dignity than he had shown in months. But most importantly, he would begin the long journey of earning forgiveness, from Grace, from his children, and from himself. Because sometimes it takes the pure hearts of children to show adults what real humanity looks like, and sometimes the most expensive flowers in Manhattan are the ones bought with allowance money and delivered with innocent love. The Mother's Day miracle wasn't just about flowers or forgiveness. It was about two children who refused to see the world through their father's prejudiced eyes, and about a woman whose strength and grace finally opened a heart that had been closed by privilege and pride. It was about learning that love knows no boundaries of race or class or status, and that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Grace and Becky would never forget that Mother's Day, not just because she received beautiful flowers, but because she witnessed the moment when innocence triumphed over ignorance, when love defeated hate, and when two precious children proved that the future could be brighter than the past. And Thomas Richardson would spend the rest of his life grateful that his children had hearts wise enough to love someone he had been too foolish to see. The flowers eventually faded, but the love that delivered them would bloom in the Richardson household for generations to come. A reminder that every person deserves to be seen, valued, and honored for the unique light they bring into the world.